The California wildfires have been devastating. The death toll's now at 27. The fires still rage on. Winds have died down a bit, but there is concern they could come back. But the question remains, who's at fault? Was this mismanagement by government authorities? Was this an act of nature, or is climate change to blame? Well, Bernie Sanders said you're a moron if you don't believe it's climate change because it's here and it's coming for all of us. But I think the reality is, while we can look at wildfires occurring all the time, it was mismanaged. Now, recently, Bill Burr, the comedian, went on Jimmy Kimmel and said that we're all a bunch of idiots because we think that they're doing a bad job in California. Now, of course, to the firefighters, first responders, the people risking their lives, they're heroes. Nobody's criticizing the hard work. We're criticizing the policy around, well, the Democratic politicians around fires, around the fire department, around insurance. All of this has led to this catastrophe. You know, they voted to build reservoirs and never did. There's a dam that they were supposed to build a while ago, but it's blocked off because everyone's fighting about it. The LA Fire Department was underserved, underfunded, did not have enough firefighters, and we can point all these things out. Now, I've criticized Bill Burr on this one before, but he takes it a step further, jokingly, I hope, yelling, "Free Luigi!" Because he's criticizing the insurance companies, saying no one's going to call them out. These guys in their underwear are saying, why don't you fly a helicopter into the ocean at 100-knot winds, you moron? But you're not going to call it the insurance companies who pulled out, won't cover these homes, and they're still going to pay themselves a bonus. And then everybody claps and he yells, "Free Luigi." Oh, I want to play the clip for you. But let's talk about the insurance company scandal, because boy, oh boy, can I break it down for you. First of all, I'm going to say the climate change argument I can debunk rather easily. There's been a drought in California every single decade. You can't blame drought and claim it's global warming. But of course, nearly every news outlet's doing that. Let's break it down, and I'll talk to you about how they passed a proposition in California restricting insurance companies from increasing rates. They've mismanaged the forest floor and the brush floor, increasing the risk of wildfires. They've put restrictions on what people can do with water. Ultimately, the mismanagement leads to a situation where insurance company says, we can't mitigate the fire damage. It keeps getting worse year after year. We cannot do this anymore. Little known fact. Insurance companies have insurance companies, and the insurance, I'm not kidding, they're called reinsurers. And the reinsurers are basically saying the same thing. This is going to get worse. It's not climate change. It's mismanagement. Before we get into all that, my friends, make sure you head over to castbrew.com and pick up a delicious bag of Cast Brew coffee. Ian's Graphene Dream nearly sold out. We had 2,100 bags. Man, it's almost completely gone. And don't forget to go to timcast.com and click Join Us. As a member, you'll get access to our Discord community with a massive library of content. There's a morning show on your way to work. Turn it on. There's a pre-Timcast IRL show, and there's the After Dark show. When you join the Timcast community, you get access to our uncensored members-only content. You can call in to the show, talk to us and our guests. And as a member, you will meet people, build community, and it's how we make a change. Join the movement now at timcast.com. Let's take a look at the first story from the New York Post. Bill Burr unloads on insurance companies, praises Luigi Mangione in LA fire rant, "Free Luigi."
The winds moved, but, the fire was coming and all that stuff, so I feel lucky.
Are you guys back in?
And I think everybody did a great job.
Yeah.
Unlike the internet,
Yeah, right. I know. It's right.
Oh, my God. All of these fire experts. Why didn't you just fly a helicopter into the ocean? You know what? Looking at the footage on the internet, I have determined that this here was mismanaged. They're talking about looting, but CNN and Fox News are not going to bring up the insurance companies that are just going to keep everybody's premiums and still give themselves a bonus. Yeah. Yes. Free Luigi.
You know, to be honest, I'd call it a joke. Bill Burr is a very funny guy. I'm actually a big fan. But as of late, he's just been towing this line, which defends massive corporations and government bureaucrats who did a bad job. I'd like to say the free LUIGI comment was a joke, but tons of leftists have been posting memes about this. When news broke that insurance companies had previously pulled out of California, people are posting memes where they have like a phone with Luigi Mangione on speed dial. And I'm sure most of you know who he is. He's the guy who murdered a healthcare insurance CEO in cold blood, blaming the insurance companies for, unfortunately, what it is a government problem. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of how the insurance companies worked and how this is the fault of the government, let's take a look at the direct fault of the government. LA Fire Department bosses sent just 5 fire engines to Palisades Fire while holding back 1,000 firefighters and 35 trucks in the critical first hours. New York Post reporting. Los Angeles fire bosses deployed just a fraction of its firefighters and trucks to the deadly Palisades fire until it was already out of control, sending just 5 of the 40 available fire engines and holding back 1,000 firefighters, according to a new damning report. The critical decisions blasted by experts and ex-fire chiefs as a spate of missteps were made even as extreme warnings were coming in about life-threatening winds that turned the blaze into the most destructive in LA history. Quote, "You would have had a better chance to get a better result if you deployed those engines," former LAFD Battalion Chief Rick Crawford told the LA Times. "You give yourself the best chance to minimize how big the fire could get. If you do that, you have the ability to say, 'I threw everything at it at the outset.' That didn't happen here," he continued, adding the choices were part of a domino effect of missteps by officials. Officials held off on ordering hundreds of available fire crews to remain on duty for a second shift last Tuesday, which would have doubled the manpower on hand to help battle flames taking hold in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood, according to internal fire department records obtained by the Times. Despite being available, no extra engines were readied in the Palisades region prior to the fire breaking out there, according to the logs. LA's Deputy Chief Richard Fields, who is in charge of staffing and equipment, stressed that his plan was appropriate for immediate response and slammed critics for playing Monday morning quarterback. His boss, Chief Christian Crowley, also defended the decision. The Times also reported that before the fires, LAFD leaders decided not to deploy additional engines to fire-prone areas like the Palisades. However, 9 engines were positioned in Hollywood and the San Fernando Valley in anticipation of fires breaking out there. So let me just throw it to you, Bill. I don't think a former battalion chief is some random guy sitting in his underwear. When he says it was a domino effect of misstep after misstep after misstep, I think it's fair to say that it was. Now, of course, I can go through that huge whole list over and over again, as I had done, but I think this should be enough context for all of you to understand that this guy going on Jimmy Kimmel himself are misleading you. Why? I don't know. I think Bill Burr doesn't pay attention and is making jokes. But I'm really concerned about that free LUIGI comment. Why is it a joke to praise a murderer? Well, look, I got to be honest. People don't like insurance companies, and I get it. I really do. But this is not an issue of just the private sector. It's a combination of both. I can't really blame an insurance company for being unable to insure property. It's not like the insurance company said, you know what, we don't want to insure them because it cuts into our profits. They said, we are trying to increase premiums. We are trying to make sure this is reasonable for the insurance company, but we keep losing billions of dollars. The regulation and the mismanagement make it impossible to do. Of course, insurance companies want to make profits. Duh, we get it. But insurance company is going to say, how much money can we make and does it make sense? The reason why it doesn't make sense, mismanagement, a failure to build new reservoirs, to fill the existing reservoirs, to provide proper funding to the LA Fire Department, to hire enough firefighters, and eventually the insurance company says, guys, it doesn't matter what we do. If we insure this at any rate, the government is not going to do anything to mitigate fire damage. They're going to blame climate change. We cannot, as a business, make this work. AccuWeather estimates more than $250 billion in damages and economic loss from LA wildfires. To put the magnitude of loss into context, this latest damage and economic loss estimates surpasses the numbers for the entire 2020 wildfire season. So let's now break down the insurance argument with this article from the AP, going back almost 2 years. California insurance market rattled by withdrawal of major companies. The date? June 5th. 2023. Hold on there a minute. You mean to tell me that we've had advanced warning for over a year and a half that insurance companies were pulling out because they could not deal with fire damage, and yet here we are. How is this anything but mismanagement? You go back to this story. This is AP News. Everybody knew the risk of wildfires were increasing. And what did the California government do about it? Yeah, we know. Not enough. Let's call it that. But let's break down how the insurance fell apart. In 2023, the AP reported 2 insurance industry giants have pulled back from California's home insurance marketplace, saying that increasing wildfire risk and soaring construction costs have prompted them to stop writing new policies in the nation's most populous state. State Farm announced last week it would stop accepting applications for all business and personal lines of property and casualty insurance, citing inflation, a challenging reinsurance market, and rapidly growing catastrophe exposure. The decision did not impact personal auto insurance. Quote, "We take seriously our responsibility to manage risk," State Farm said. "It's necessary to take these actions now to improve the company's financial strength." Allstate, another insurance powerhouse, announced in November it would pause new homeowners, condo, and commercial insurance policies in California to protect current customers. Quote, "The cost to insure new home customers in California is far higher than the price they would pay for policies due to wildfires. Higher costs for repairing homes and higher reinsurance premiums," Allstate said in a statement. And of course, they report, scientists say climate change has made the West warmer and drier over the last 3 decades and will continue to make weather more extreme and wildfires more frequent and destructive. In recent years, California has experienced the largest and most destructive fires in state history. Some California homeowners already are going without coverage, and a shortage of new policies could make it more difficult to buy a home. A state-run pool that serves as the insurer of last resort for many could face pressure as enrollments surge. Now, many of you may not be familiar with what reinsurance is, and I absolutely love how stupid our system is, but I guess it makes sense. Reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies. I kid you not. The insurance company has an insurance company that if they have to pay out, some of their costs are handled by their insurer. It's weird. And the insurance company's insurance rates have gone up. They can't necessarily pass those premiums on to the customer, though they are trying. So ultimately, they're just basically saying, hey, we can't do this. Investopedia breaks it down. Reinsurance definition, how it works. Quite simply, reinsurance, insurance for insurance companies. Now, of course, I'm absolutely loving the climate change argument, and I definitely want to tackle that. But first, let's talk about the current state of insurance. Now, as I mentioned, reinsurance premiums were going up. The insurance companies are having an issue with it. They did try to pass that on to the customer, but it ultimately still doesn't work. The issue is, no matter how much money you charge, first of all, you probably can't. If it's too much, the market will not abide and people won't pay for it. They're basically going to say, I'm spending more in insurance than the cost of fixing my own home if it does get burned down. The problem, failure of government to mitigate the disaster means it's inevitable. But let's take a look at the laws they passed so we can better understand. Well, everybody's ragging on the insurance companies, and to be honest, rightly so in some circumstances. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to defend insurance companies. There is still something to consider. Well, there's a lot to consider. But we have California Proposition 103, a state statute passed in 1988 to regulate insurance rates and practices. Basically, this means that insurers must get approval from the California Department of Insurance before they can change rates. And this covers dwelling fires. This means that insurance companies are basically like, hey, government, can we increase rates? You're doing a bad job, and we can't afford to cover this. And what do you think the government's going to say? Largely, no. So the government is regulating the insurance premiums, and I'm not saying they don't allow premiums to go up. They do, but they still have their thumb on the scales, putting pressure on these companies, so it's harder for them to move quickly enough. And with the fires that were burning even last year, sorry, the insurance companies just said, we're pulling out. You can't blame a company for canceling a product that makes no money. Politico reported this as, this could be the beginning of the end for fire insurance in California. The damages could overwhelm the state's already stressed insurer of last resort. The state's insurer of last resort, known as the FAIR plan, predicted that it would be able to pay out, saying, we're aware of misinformation being posted online regarding the FAIR plan's ability to pay claims. It is too early to provide loss estimates as claims are just beginning to be submitted and processed. But California faces a double-barreled threat. Private insurers could continue to drop policies and decline to write new ones, as they've been increasingly doing since a series of severe fires beginning in 2017, with the Tubbs Fire in Northern California. And the FAIR Plan, which has been absorbing the shrinking private market, could run out of money to pay its claims. TheTimes.com brought us this report: why California's insurance crisis leaves wildfire victims helpless. Policyholders in LA have faced a wave of cancellations by some of the largest companies in the sector. They say while the LA fires are still raging, having killed 25 people and caused billions of dollars worth of damage, Californians are also feeling the heat from a slower burning crisis, the dysfunction of the state's insurance market. Faced with the escalating cost of wildfires and burdensome state regulations, many insurance companies have ceased doing business in the state in recent years, leaving some of those worst affected by the fires to rebuild without help. In July, America's largest insurer, State Farm, canceled 1,600 insurance policies in Pacific Palisades, the prosperous neighborhood that was the first to catch fire. While State Farm continues to do business in the state, many other companies, including AmGuard, American National, and Falls Lake, have stopped signing policies in California entirely. One reason why is that California has become the land of enormous insurance payouts. As global temperatures rise, the state has languished in a historic drought, helping to create the conditions for unprecedentedly ferocious wildfires. 8 of the state's most destructive fires have occurred since 2017. I object to this line of logic. You can argue climate change all day and night, but it doesn't change the fact that we are dealing with massive mismanagement. And I'm going to break down at least my argument. By all means, you want to talk about climate change and all of these things, fine. But isn't California the liberal bastion that has implemented tons of regulation over environmental issues? Yes. Have any of those regulations mitigated the risk of fire? No. So hold on. They're the state largely telling you about climate change. And what are they doing to solve the problem? Apparently nothing. Now we can take a look at, as I've already mentioned, ad nauseum. Not enough firefighters. The reservoirs were empty. They haven't built the dams. They haven't built the new reservoirs. They did not dispatch LAFD in time. And you want to tell me, but it's climate change? Jumping over to our good friend Wikipedia makes it all so simple. Major droughts in California history since 1900. Tell me now, was the Great Industrial Revolution responsible for the 1917 to 21 drought? Was that carbon emissions? Every single decade, except for the 1900s themselves, there has been a drought in California. You've got the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, twice, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s and 90s, the 2000s and the 2010s, and then today. Tell me again why you think that's climate change. Now, to be fair, Wikipedia also does mention climate change, saying that there's an increase in temperature. It is having an impact. Sure, fine. I can accept that, but I also need to point out wildfires happened. 100 years ago, the state was substantially less developed, so many of these wildfires may have gone largely unnoticed. We have an expanding population, a massive urban center, and a higher likelihood that wildfires will impact the public. Thus, we will see the damage. The damage will cost lots of money, and insurance companies will be overburdened. If you go back to 1900, I'm sure there are wildfires. I'm sure there's a lot of them. Maybe there are more today. But my point ultimately is this. Droughts happen. We know they happen. California is not raking the ground floor like Donald Trump 5 years ago warned them to do. So I don't think it's fair to blame climate change when we know they aren't doing what they've been tasked with. Take a look at California Proposition 1, the water bond in 2014. They voted to build more water storage, dams and reservoirs, to improve drinking water quality and water recycling and flood management. And guess what? They didn't build any of these reservoirs. Here's a story from Cal Matters. This reservoir on the Sacramento River has been planned for decades. What's taking so long? From 2023. And then we have the Temperance Flat Dam. This one's been on hold for a long time. It's a proposed dam project on the San Joaquin River west of Aubrey, California. Construction of the dam is on hold, says Wikipedia. The main purpose would be to supplement storage capacity in the upper San Joaquin River basin. Under the current proposal, Temperance Flat would slightly more than double water storage on the San Joaquin River from below Friant Dam. The project is highly controversial because it would flood scenic canyons and historic sites. And now this next part you're going to love. Why is it that some of these reservoirs aren't being built? The Temperance Dam, we get it. There's controversy over what it would do to these areas. But what about these other reservoirs and water storage units? Well, as it would happen, the state has environmental regulations, which means they have to do studies on impact. And because of how long it takes, they are in limbo. I mean, come on. We've talked about building high-speed rail in this country for a long time. And California, the bastion of green energy and fighting climate change, cannot get it done. The problem is over-regulation makes it impossible to make these moves. So I throw it back to my good friend Bill Burr as we break down this whole story. You, good sir, I hope jokingly said free Luigi. This is the terrifying ignorance of the liberal mindset. I know maybe I'm offending a ton of liberals by saying this, but guys, I don't like joking about Luigi Mangione in this regard because too many people take that stuff seriously. The dude killed an insurance CEO in cold blood. It changed nothing. Rates aren't going down. Some argue that violence does. I don't want to live in that world. And I don't think it actually does change things for the better. It causes security and these companies to entrench themselves and hide what they're doing. So here's the real issue. It's a combination of factors. Insurance companies are not innocent, but neither is the government. And when you get corporate bloat and government regulation combined, you get some kind of weird fat fascism. The lucrative merger of corporation and state, some would call it. Only in this instance, I wouldn't call it lucrative. I would call it lazy. Too many people want to blame the corporations because they see people getting rich. Other people want to blame the government. But really, it's a mixture of both. We can't have monopolistic power on either side. There needs to be decentralization. Now, not all regulation is bad. I think we should regulate some things. Certainly we should. I think a lot of chemicals in food should be regulated. But we can clearly see, in some regards, it does make the problem worse. Insurance companies just say, we can't do it, thank you, and have a nice day. And while activists want to blame climate change, maybe, if it is climate change, you still have to deal with this problem. You don't get to be a state like California that blames climate change and then refuses to hire enough firefighters. By all means, blame the world. Say it's my fault personally. Say, Tim Pool, you made climate change happen. Fine. You still need to hire more firefighters. Why don't you do it? You still need to fill your reservoirs. Why don't you do it? You still need to build new ones. Make every excuse in the book, but I ain't playing that game. So I'll throw it to my good friend Bill Burr. I know he's a comedian and he's being funny, or at least trying to be. The issue is that wasn't a comedic bit. That was him on a nightly talk show speaking to, I'd say the country, but Jimmy Kimmel's ratings aren't that good, misinforming them and presenting an argument that we are all stupid, that a former LA fire chief who said misstep after misstep was some moron in his underwear on the internet. Come on, guy. If we're going to make sure this doesn't happen in the future, and we hope that it won't, we have to address the problems. And we have to do it dispassionately. Just say it like it is. I'll leave it there, my friends. Thanks for hanging out. Smash that like button. Share the show with everyone you know. We'll see you tonight. YouTube.com/TimCastIRL, 8 p.m. Thanks for hanging out.